The first time my son told me I should be grateful for whatever they give me, it was over my own kitchen table, with my checkbook open and my hands still smelling like dish soap. He said it like a favor, like kindness. I remember staring at the blue ink on the page and realizing I'd been shrinking in my own home without noticing. I'm 68 now. My name is Margaret, and I've lived long enough to know that love can be used like a key, quietly, without force, and still leave you locked out of yourself. After my husband, Frank, passed, the house got louder in a different way. Not with voices, with appliances humming too long, with the furnace clicking at night, with the mailbox lid snapping shut on bills I pretended not to fear. Frank had always handled the big things: mortgage letters, insurance renewals, the property tax escrow notices that came in stiff white envelopes. When he died, the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like being left alone on a highway shoulder, watching the world speed by. I tried to be brave in small, practical ways. I learned the online banking login. I kept a folder labeled Utilities and another one labeled Medical. And I stapled receipts the way my mother taught me. The grocery store clerks started to recognize me, and the pharmacist would ask how my blood pressure had been. Those were my conversations for a while. Those and the occasional call from my son, Michael. Michael was a good boy once, freckled, earnest, the kind who used to bring me dandelions as if they were roses. He grew into a man who wore pressed shirts and spoke fast, always sounding like he was walking somewhere while talking. He married a woman named Dana, and they had 2 kids, bright-eyed and busy. I loved them so much it scared me, because love that deep makes you easy to move. It started with little things that felt like family. A quick request for the Wi-Fi password when they visited. Michael asking if he could list my address for a package because porch pirates are getting crazy. Dana laughing and saying, "Mom, you're basically our safe deposit box." I laughed too, because the joke was soft and warm, and I wanted to belong to it. Then came the first favor that had paper attached. Michael showed up one rainy Tuesday in early fall, the kind of day where the sky sits low and gray like it's listening. He brought a thin folder and 2 coffees, one black for him and one with extra cream for me, like he remembered. He kissed my cheek, glanced at the stacks of mail on the counter, and sighed like the sight pained him. "Mom, you can't keep living like this," he said, tapping the envelope from the power company. "It's stressful for you." I told him I was fine. I was paying everything. I was learning. The truth was, I'd missed the water bill by 8 days and panicked so hard my chest hurt. I didn't tell him that part. Pride is a stubborn companion in old age. He opened the folder and slid a form toward me. "It's just a simple authorization," he said, "so I can help manage things. You know, set reminders, make sure nothing lapses, no big deal." The page had the bank's logo on top and a lot of fine print underneath. "Limited power of attorney" was written in a clean official font that made it seem harmless. He pointed with a pen. "Just here and here." I read as much as I could, but my eyes weren't what they used to be, and the words swam. I asked if it meant he could take money. He smiled in that patient way people use when they want you to feel silly for worrying. "Mom, it's your money. I'm your son. Of course I'm not taking anything." He leaned back and looked around my kitchen, at the worn linoleum and the faded curtains Frank and I had hung 20 years ago. "Besides," he added softer, "you don't have a lot to lose." That sentence landed like a pebble thrown into a still pond. Not loud, just rippling. I told him I wanted to think about it. He didn't argue. He simply set the paper down next to my checkbook, like it belonged there, like it had been waiting for me to. That evening, after they left, I sat alone with the refrigerator's hum and the distant sound of cars on wet pavement. I called my friend Eileen from church, and she told me her nephew had helped with her sister's accounts, and suddenly her sister was asking for permission to buy her own winter coat. Eileen said it like gossip, but her voice had a tight edge, like she was trying not to scare me. The next morning, Michael called. "Mom, did you sign it?" he asked, cheerful, as if we were discussing a casserole recipe. I told him I hadn't. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the faint sound of his office. Keys clicking, someone laughing far away. Then his tone shifted into something smoother, firmer. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We're trying to help you." I said I appreciated that. "Then be grateful," he replied, and I could almost see him shrugging. "Be grateful for whatever we give you. You're not entitled to anything." Entitled? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Frank and I had built that house from nothing but overtime pay and careful choices. We'd gone without vacations and new cars. We'd paid for Michael's braces, his first semester of community college, his wedding gift. I had never once said entitled to my child, not even in my worst, tired moments. I looked at my hands on the phone, the veins raised like river maps. I heard myself whisper, "Michael, I'm your mother." "I know," he said quickly, and the impatience seeped through. "That's why I'm dealing with this. Donna thinks we should just put you in a smaller place and be done with it." My heart squeezed. "Put me where?" He laughed like it was silly to be afraid. "Mom, not a home, just like a senior apartment, something manageable. We'd help you, but you have to meet us halfway." When I hung up, the kitchen felt colder, even though the thermostat read 72. I walked to the window and watched the neighbor's dog drag a stick through puddles, stubborn and joyful. I wanted to feel anything close to that. A few days later, a letter came from my homeowner's insurance company. It said my policy had been changed. The coverage limits were different, the deductible higher, and listed under additional interested parties was a name I didn't recognize at first, until I saw it clearly. Michael R. Harris. I held the paper so tight my fingers cramped. My stomach went hollow, like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't called anyone. And yet, somehow, my life had shifted on paper while I was standing still. That night, I laid every document out on the dining table. The insurance letter, the bank statements, the utility bills, the medical receipts. I turned on the lamp Frank used to read under and listened to the small buzz of the light. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. I wasn't angry yet. I was something worse than angry. I was awake. Michael came by the next Saturday with donuts and that careful smile people wear when they're already decided. The box was warm in his hands, cinnamon and sugar drifting through my entryway like a peace offering. Behind him, Dana waited in the car, engine running. She waved without getting out. He stepped into my living room and looked around the way a realtor does, not the way a son should. His eyes paused on Frank's photo on the mantel, then slid past it. "Mom," he said gently, "we need to talk about the insurance thing." I didn't sit right away. I stood near the hallway where the floorboard creaks, the one Frank used to joke about. I held the letter in my hand like a small shield. "How did your name get on my policy?" I asked. Michael exhaled, slow, as if he'd been waiting for me to be difficult. "I called to ask questions," he said. "That's all. They must have added me as a contact. It doesn't mean anything." "It means I didn't authorize it," I replied. My voice sounded steady, but inside I felt thin, like paper. He set the donuts on the coffee table and opened the box. "Please don't make this into something dramatic. Dana's dad is on their insurance paperwork, and it's fine. It's normal." Normal. That word again, used like a blanket to cover a problem. I looked at his hands, Clean nails, wedding ring, the watch Frank gave him for graduation. I remembered those same hands, small and sticky, reaching for mine in the school parking lot. My throat tightened. "If it's normal," I said quietly, "why didn't you tell me?" His smile flickered. "Because you'd overthink it, like you're doing now." I sat then, because my knees suddenly wanted to give up. The cushions sighed under me. I stared at the bank statement on the side table, the one I hadn't had the courage to file yet. The last page showed an automatic payment I didn't recognize, a monthly charge labeled Harris Family Stream. It was only $19,999, but it was mine, coming out of my account like a tiny leak. I held it up. "What's this?" Michael leaned forward, squinting. "Oh," he said, as if he'd found a penny. "That's just the streaming bundle. It's cheaper as a family plan." "A family plan," I repeated. "Yeah, and you use it too, don't you?" he asked quickly. "You watch those cooking shows." I did watch cooking shows, but I watched them on free channels with commercials, the kind that remind you every 12 minutes that you're not the target audience anymore. I never signed up for any bundle, and the thing that hit me wasn't the $19. It was the ease in his voice, like my account was a shared drawer in the kitchen, open to anyone who needed a spoon. He took my silence as permission. "See," he said, relaxed now. "This is exactly why you need us. You don't even remember what you've signed up for." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I blinked it down. I had cried enough after Frank. I had cried in the shower so the sound wouldn't echo through the empty house. I wasn't going to cry because my son wanted to rewrite my life. Michael reached into his folder and pulled out a different paper, crisp and new. "I brought something simpler," he said. "A caregiver agreement, just to make everything official. It's for your benefit, Mom. If anything happens, we can prove we've been taking care of you." The title at the top looked harmless, almost kind. Below it were paragraphs about compensation, reimbursement, and residence transition planning. My stomach clenched. "I'm not hiring you," I said. He laughed softly, like I'd made a cute mistake. "It's not like that. It's just smart. Dana read about it online. If you ever need Medicaid or assisted living, they look at your finances. This protects you." I stared at the word compensation. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, then said it fast. "Just a little monthly, for groceries, rides, time. We're here all the time anyway." Here, all the time. He came maybe twice a month. Dana came less. The kids visited when there was something in it for them. Cookies, cash for a school fundraiser, a babysitter they could count on. I had told myself that was normal too, that young families are busy, that love doesn't always show up as often as you want. Michael slid the paper toward me. "Sign it, and we can stop arguing. You'll be taken care of. And honestly, Mom, you should be grateful for whatever we give you. Not everyone has family willing to deal with this." Deal with this. Like I was a broken appliance, I looked past him to the window. The afternoon sun was pale, filtering through bare branches. A delivery truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere a lawnmower started up, out of season and stubborn. Life kept moving, indifferent to the way my heart was trying to decide what to do. "I want to read it," I said. Michael's jaw tightened. "It's standard." "I still want to read it." He leaned back and crossed his arms. "Fine, but don't drag it out. We're doing this for you." When he left, he took the donuts with him. Not all of them, just the box, like even sugar was conditional. The next morning, I called the insurance company. My hands shook so hard, I had to press my fingers against the counter to steady them. After the usual menu options and a recorded voice reminding me my call might be monitored, a woman named Carla came on the line. Her voice was calm and practiced, the voice of someone who'd heard every kind of mess. I gave her my policy number. I asked carefully who had requested changes. There was a pause while she typed. I could hear the soft clicking, like rain on glass. "Mrs. Whitman?" she said. The changes were requested through the online portal. "I don't use the online portal," I replied. "According to the notes," Carla continued, "someone logged in with your credentials and added an additional interested party. Then coverage limits were adjusted." My stomach dropped. "Can you tell me who?" "I can't see a name," she said, "but I can see the email on file that received the confirmation." She read it out loud. It wasn't mine, it was Michael's. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The kitchen blurred. I reached for the chair and sat hard. My mind tried to protect me by offering excuses. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Carla read it wrong. Maybe Michael had helped set it up and forgot to change it back. But deep down, something old and honest in me whispered. He didn't forget. Carla's voice softened. "Mrs. Whitman, if you believe your account was accessed without your permission, we can flag it. We can also reset your login and remove unauthorized contacts. You may want to file an incident report for your records." Incident report. Records. Paper trails. Those words steadied me more than comfort ever could. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how clear I sounded. "Please do that." When I hung up, I sat at the table with Frank's lamp glowing warm over the documents. I pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind with college-ruled lines, and I wrote the date at the top. I wrote Carla's name. I wrote the time of the call. I wrote the email address she had read to me, letter by letter. My hands stopped shaking as the ink dried. I wasn't planning revenge yet, not in a dramatic way. I wasn't even sure what I was planning. But for the first time in a long time, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. Instead, I started asking a different question. What exactly had they been taking from me, without ever saying thank you? Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every sound in the house felt louder, sharper, like it was trying to tell me something I'd ignored for years. The refrigerator clicked on and off. The wind nudged the loose gutter outside. At 3 a.m, I got up and padded into the dining room, where the papers still lay spread out under Frank's lamp, waiting patiently. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down again. Robe wrapped tight, glasses perched low on my nose. I began reading everything, not skimming, not trusting my memory. Reading the way Frank used to read contracts, slow and suspicious, pencil in hand. I circled things. I underlined dates. I wrote questions in the margins, like a student who had finally decided to pass the class. The caregiver agreement Michael had brought looked different in the quiet of night. Words like reasonable compensation and discretionary authority no longer felt friendly. They felt slippery. There was a clause about reimbursement for expenses paid on behalf of the client, and another about relocation decisions if the current residence became impractical. Impractical. My home, where my husband died holding my hand, reduced to a word that could be checked off a form. By morning, my tea had gone cold, and my chest ached, but my head felt clearer than it had in months. I called the bank after breakfast. I expected to be brushed off, to be told I was confused. Instead, a young man named Aaron listened carefully as I explained the unfamiliar charges and asked about access to my account. He asked me security questions I actually knew the answers to. When he told me there had been multiple logins from a device registered under my son's name, I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. "Mrs. Whitman," Aaron said gently, "we can restrict access immediately. We can also provide you with a detailed activity log if you'd like." "Yes," I said. "I'd like that very much." The printer whirred later that afternoon, spitting out pages of dates and times, small black evidence marks of decisions I hadn't made. A grocery store near Michael's office, an electronics retailer I'd never visited, a transfer labeled temporary reimbursement. Temporary my foot. I stacked the papers neatly. I didn't cry. I surprised myself with that. The sadness was there, heavy and old, but something else sat beside it now. Resolve, maybe, or dignity rediscovered in a drawer I hadn't opened in a while. Michael called that evening. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, already defensive. "The insurance company called me. They said you removed me." "I did," I replied. There was a sharp breath on the other end. "Why would you do that? We talked about this." "We talked," I agreed, "but you acted." "You're overreacting," he snapped. "This is exactly what Dana warned me about. You're emotional." I looked down at the activity log on the table. The facts felt solid under my fingertips. "No," I said quietly. "I'm informed." Silence stretched. Then he tried a different tone. Softer, almost pleading. "Mom, listen. We're just trying to make sure you're okay. You forget things. You get overwhelmed. You need help." I thought about the notebook where I'd written Carla's name. Errands, the dates, the times. "I do need help," I said. "Just not the kind that takes without asking." He scoffed. "So what, you're cutting us off now?" "I'm setting boundaries," I replied, and the word felt strange and powerful in my mouth. "There's a difference." He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat alone again, but the loneliness felt different. It wasn't empty. It was spacious. I could hear myself think in it. Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when the people you raised stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource? A few days later, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her office smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner, and the waiting room had chairs that were too firm to nap in. Her name was Linda Perez, and she had kind eyes that didn't rush. I laid my folder on her desk and told her everything, from the insurance change to the $19 streaming charge. She didn't interrupt. She didn't sigh. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "You did the right thing by documenting this." Those words loosened something tight in my chest. Linda explained my options carefully: revoking access, updating beneficiaries, creating clear directives that required my consent, in writing, witnessed. She talked about elder financial abuse without drama, like a fact of life that could be addressed with preparation and paper. I walked out of her office with copies of forms and a sense of direction. Outside, the sun was bright, the kind of winter light that makes everything look honest. At home, I changed my passwords. All of them. Banking, insurance, email, even the old social media account I barely used. I set up two-factor authentication with my landline and my cell. The phone chimed with confirmation texts, each one a small reclaiming. Donna sent a message later that week. It was short. "Michael's really upset. He was only trying to help. I hope you can be more understanding." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I understand perfectly," I typed, and for once, I meant it. As I put the phone down, I looked around my living room. The worn couch, Frank's photo, the quiet that no longer felt like abandonment. For years, I had confused endurance with love. I had believed that being needed was the same as being valued. Sitting there, with my documents filed and my accounts secured, I realized something that felt both painful and freeing. I wasn't invisible. I had just been standing very still, waiting for permission to move. The next time they came, they didn't knock the way family knocks. They knocked the way someone knocks when they've decided they belong on the other side of your door. It was late afternoon, the kind of winter day that turns the windows into mirrors before dinner. I saw Michael's silhouette first, tall and rigid on the porch, and behind him Dana, arms folded, her hair pulled tight like she was bracing for a fight. The kids hovered near the steps, whispering to each other, confused by the mood they couldn't name. I opened the door just enough to let the cold air slip in. Michael forced a smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside. I let them in. I didn't want a scene on the porch, not with neighbors walking dogs and mail trucks crawling past like curious witnesses. Dana didn't sit. She stayed standing by the fireplace as if warmth was beneath her. Michael perched on the edge of the couch, bouncing one knee, trying to look casual. The children drifted toward the kitchen, already searching for snacks out of habit. Dana's eyes went to the folder on my dining table. She said, "Still doing paperwork?" I nodded. "I'm staying organized." Michael cleared his throat. "We're worried," he began, and the word worried sounded rehearsed. "You've been making changes, removing us from things, locking us out." "Locking you out of my accounts," I corrected. Dana let out a little laugh that didn't reach her face. "It's not your accounts if we're the ones helping you keep them afloat." I stared at her. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were listening. "I've paid every bill in this house for decades," I said, "even after Frank died." Dana shrugged. "And now you're older. Things change." Michael reached into his coat and pulled out my mail. My mail. A thick bundle with rubber bands around it, the kind the post office uses when something's been redirected. He set it on the coffee table like evidence. "These have been going to our house," he said. "Did you know that?" My throat tightened. "No." He flipped through the envelopes, pretending to be shocked alongside me. "See, Mom, this is the problem. You don't know what's happening. You're missing important stuff." I picked up the top envelope and felt my heart stumble. It was from my bank, addressed to me, but the corner had a small printed note, "Change of address confirmation." Dana's voice softened into something almost sweet. "We did that so you wouldn't lose things," she said. "Your mailbox is out by the street. Anyone could take your mail." "And you didn't think to tell me?" I asked. Michael's cheeks reddened. "We didn't think you'd freak out." I looked at him, really looked. There was a faint tremor in his jaw, a tightness around the eyes that didn't used to be there. He wasn't just confident. He was nervous, like someone who knew the floor might give out under him. I stood and carried the bundle to the dining table. I untied the rubber bands slowly, forcing myself to breathe. There were more than bank letters, a medical statement, a property tax notice, a credit card offer I'd never seen, and a thin, glossy envelope from an office supply store with a receipt folded inside. I opened it. Inside was a receipt for a locking file box and a pack of heavy-duty shredder bags. Purchased 2 weeks ago, not by me. The store location was 10 minutes from Michael's office. Dana watched my face, then said briskly, "We're not here to argue. We're here to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. Michael leaned forward, eyes earnest. "We need you to sign the caregiver agreement. Linda's fine, but lawyers make everything complicated. This can be simple." The way he said my lawyer's name made my spine stiffen. "How do you know my lawyer's name?" Dana's gaze flicked away for half a second. Too fast. "Michael told me," she said. Michael nodded quickly, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. In that tiny moment, I understood something that had been forming quietly in my mind. They were watching me. They were tracking my moves, like this was a game and not my life. The kids burst into the room then, carrying a bag of chips they'd found in my pantry. "Grandma, can we have hot chocolate?" my granddaughter asked, bright and hopeful, trying to cheer the air without knowing it needed cheering. I smiled at her, because none of this was her fault. "Of course, honey." As I warmed milk on the stove, I heard Dana speaking in a low voice behind me. "She's being stubborn. If she won't sign, we need to push harder. The house is the only real asset." The spoon stopped in my hand. Milk shivered in the pan. I didn't turn around. but I listened the way you listen when your survival depends on hearing the truth. Michael murmured something I couldn't make out. Then Dana said, sharper, "She can't handle it alone. We'll have to take control." Take control over me. I carried the mugs into the living room with steady hands. The smell of cocoa filled the space like an attempt at comfort. I set one mug in front of each child and watched their faces soften with relief. Dana didn't touch hers. Michael tried again. "Mom, please, just sign it. It's for your own good. You don't have to be scared of us." I sat across from him, hands folded neatly in my lap. "I'm not scared," I said. "I'm paying attention." Dana's lips tightened. "So what? You think we're criminals?" she asked. I thought about the bank logins, the redirected mail, the insurance email, the transfer labeled temporary reimbursement. None of it felt like a mistake anymore. "I think you've been making decisions that don't belong to you," I said. "And I think you've been counting on me being too tired or too lonely to stop you." Michael's eyes flashed. "You're acting like we've done nothing for you." I let the silence sit for a moment. In that silence, I could hear the children sipping cocoa, the faint scrape of a spoon on ceramic. Ordinary sounds, trying to survive in a room full of tension. Then I spoke carefully, because I had learned that calm words can cut deeper than shouting. "Bring my mail back," I said. "Restore my address. Remove yourselves from anything you added without my permission. And do not ask me to sign anything again." Dana's voice rose just a notch. "You can't do this alone." I looked at Frank's photo on the mantel, at the man who used to remind me that being kind didn't mean being soft. Then I looked back at her. "Watch me," I said. They left in a storm of quiet anger. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just stiff goodbyes and the sound of tires on cold pavement. The kids waved sadly from the back seat, their faces pressed to the glass, and my heart cracked in a place I didn't know could still crack. When the house settled again, I didn't collapse. I didn't spiral. I went to my desk and opened my notebook. I wrote down what I'd heard in the kitchen. I wrote down the receipt details. I wrote down the address confirmation notice and the date on the envelope. Then I picked up the phone and called the post office. The clerk explained the change of address process with the bored patience of someone who says the same lines all day. He told me a forwarding request could be submitted online, and sometimes it was done without a signature. He said I could file a fraud complaint, place a hold, and require in-person identity verification for any future changes. I asked him to do it. After that, I called Linda. I didn't cry when I spoke. I simply told her I needed to tighten everything: my will, my beneficiaries, my medical directive, my privacy. She said, "Good, we'll do it cleanly." I hung up and walked through my house, room by room, as if seeing it for the first time. The back door, where Frank used to hang his coat. The hallway mirror, where I'd watched my hair turn silver. The drawer, where I kept old birthday cards. I realized then that the real theft wasn't money. It was the story they were trying to write about me, that I was fragile, confused, lucky to be managed. And as the evening light faded into blue, I made myself a quiet promise that felt like a hand placed firmly on my own shoulder. If they wanted me to be grateful for whatever they gave me, they were about to learn what it felt like when I stopped giving. The days after that visit moved slowly, but with purpose. Every morning I woke up with a small ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from holding too many thoughts overnight. And every morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and did one concrete thing to reclaim my life. I didn't tell anyone about it, not Eileen from church, not the neighbor who always asked if my son was taking good care of me. This wasn't about proving anything, it was about accuracy, The bank sent the full activity report by mail, thick and official, stamped with dates and transaction IDs. I read it line by line, then highlighted anything that wasn't mine. The electronic store charge turned out to be for a tablet, purchased, returned, then purchased again. The grocery store charges clustered around Michael's lunch breaks. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, it formed a picture that was impossible to unsee. I scheduled another meeting with Linda. This time, I brought everything: the caregiver agreement, the mail forwarding notice, the insurance letter, the bank logs. She arranged the papers carefully on her desk, aligning the corners the way people do when they're preparing to say something serious. "This isn't confusion," she said at last. "It's control." Hearing it named out loud steadied me. Linda explained how easy it was for family members to overstep when they believed they were entitled to manage someone else's life. She talked about consent the way you talk about gravity: simple, non-negotiable, always present whether people respect it or not. We updated my will that afternoon. I changed beneficiaries on accounts Michael had always assumed were his by default. I created a medical power of attorney that named my niece Claire instead, with clear language requiring my direct approval for any financial decisions. Claire lived 2 states away, worked as a school administrator, and had never once asked me for anything. When I called her to explain, she cried, not from obligation, but from relief that I trusted her. At home, I installed a small lock on the filing cabinet in the dining room, not because I was afraid of burglars, but because it felt right to have one place that was unquestionably mine. I bought it myself at the hardware store, paid cash, and kept the receipt folded neatly in my wallet. Michael texted twice that week. Short messages: "Can we talk?" And later, "This is getting blown out of proportion." I didn't reply. Silence, I learned, is not cruelty. It's clarity. Dana left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, polite in the way people get when they're trying to sound reasonable for the record. She said they were concerned about my mental state and suggested a family meeting with a counselor. She mentioned the kids, how much they missed me. I listened once, then I saved it. The next letter came from a credit card company thanking me for my interest. I hadn't applied. I called immediately. After verifying my identity, the representative confirmed an online application had been started, but not completed. The IP address wasn't mine. They flagged my credit and placed a freeze on my report. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, not because things were resolved, but because they were no longer vague. There is a strange comfort in facts, even hard ones. A few days later, a uniformed police officer knocked on my door. My heart jumped, but I didn't panic. Panic comes from surprises, and I had learned to expect them. The officer introduced himself as Officer Reynolds and explained that my son had called for a welfare check. He said they'd received a report that I might be confused, isolated, possibly being taken advantage of by outside influences. I almost laughed at the irony. I invited him in. I offered him a chair. I handed him my folder. He took his time, reading through documents, listening as I explained calmly, clearly without emotion. I showed him the bank logs, the mail forwarding confirmation, the insurance email trail, the saved voicemail. I spoke the way Linda had coached me. Plain facts, no accusations, no speculation. Officer Reynolds nodded slowly. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, "you seem very aware of what's going on." "I am," I replied. He asked if I felt unsafe. No, if anyone was forcing me to make decisions. No, if I wanted to file a report. "Not today," I said, "but I want this documented." He wrote notes carefully, the scratch of his pen steady and respectful. When he stood to leave, he looked me in the eye. "You did the right thing by keeping records," he said. "If anything changes, call us directly." After he left, the house felt different again. Not violated, not tense, protected. That evening, I made soup and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. Outside, the street lights flickered on one by one. Somewhere down the block, a television laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I thought about the word grateful, how often it's used like a leash, something to keep you compliant. I thought about how easily kindness can be mistaken for permission. I wasn't angry yet, not really, but something in me had shifted permanently. I had stopped hoping they would understand, and in that space where hope used to sit, something stronger had begun to grow. The first thing I noticed was how quiet my phone became once I stopped responding. No daily check-ins disguised as concern. No just making sure messages. Silence can be a kind of withdrawal symptom when someone realizes the access has been cut. A week passed, then another. I settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar and grounding at the same time. Morning walks around the block, afternoon naps without guilt, evenings spent reading library books instead of scrolling through channels I never asked to pay for. My life shrank in a good way, like a room after clutter has been cleared. Then the letter arrived. It came certified, the kind you have to sign for, and the return address made my stomach tighten. It was from a family counseling center across town. Inside was a notice stating that Michael and Dana had requested a mediated family intervention due to concerns about my capacity to make informed decisions. The language was careful, professional, and sharp as glass. They weren't backing off. I sat at the table and read it twice. There was no court order, no requirement, just an invitation dressed up like authority. A deadline for response, a phone number, a space at the bottom where my consent would normally go. I didn't call. Instead, I called Linda. She listened, then said calmly, "This is a pressure tactic. They want a paper trail that suggests you're resistant or uncooperative." "What do we do?" I asked. "We respond," she said, "in writing, on your terms." She drafted a letter that afternoon. It stated that I was fully capable, independently represented by counsel, and that any further attempts to question my capacity without medical basis would be considered harassment. It referenced the welfare check, the bank records, and the unauthorized account activity. It requested that all communication go through her office. When I signed it, my hand didn't shake. The reply came faster than I expected. Michael called from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But there are moments when clarity demands confrontation. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice raw, stripped of polish. "Why are you making us look like villains?" I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. "I'm not making you look like anything," I said. "I'm just not covering for you anymore." "You didn't even come to the meeting," he snapped. "I wasn't required to." "You've changed," he said, like it was an accusation. I thought about that for a moment. "No," I replied. "I've stopped pretending." He went quiet, then softer. "Do you have any idea how this looks? To the kids, to everyone?" There it was, not concern for me, for appearances. "I know exactly how it looks," I said. "It looks like a woman deciding her life is not a group project." He hung up. 2 days later, Linda called with an update. Dana had contacted her office, requesting copies of my medical directives and financial plans for family transparency. Linda declined and documented the request. "They're escalating because they're losing leverage," she said, "which means we stay boring, we stay factual." Boring turned out to be powerful. I froze my credit fully. I placed alerts on my property title. I updated my bank to require in-person verification for any changes, with a note in bold red letters: "No third-party authorization without client present." Each step felt like setting a stone in place. Not dramatic, permanent. The kids stopped calling too. That hurt more than I expected. I missed their noise, their careless affection. I missed the way they used to sprawl on my living room floor, crumbs everywhere, lives wide open. I wondered what they were being told. That Grandma was sick, that Grandma was confused, that Grandma didn't want to see them. Some nights, that thought sat heavy on my chest. Have you ever realized that standing up for yourself might cost you the very people you are protecting yourself from? The answer didn't come right away, but the question stayed, steady and honest. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived from the county records office. Inside was confirmation that my property title had been locked against unauthorized transfer. I held the paper for a long time, feeling its weight. They couldn't move me anymore. Not legally, not quietly. I made tea and sat by the window as the sun slid down behind the houses. Across the street, a woman my age was planting something new in her yard, kneeling carefully, patiently. I watched her press soil around roots, firm but gentle. That night, I wrote one more entry in my notebook. I am not punishing them. I am choosing myself. For years, I had been afraid that saying no would make me unlovable. Now I understood something truer. Love that only survives your silence was never love meant to last. Spring arrived quietly, without asking permission. One morning, I noticed the light looked different on the kitchen floor, softer, more forgiving. I opened a window for the first time in months and let the air move through the house, carrying the sound of birds and distant lawn equipment. Life, unbothered, continued. The first real change came from an unexpected place. I received a letter from the bank manager, not a form letter this time, but a signed note asking if I'd be willing to come in for a review. When I arrived, he greeted me by name and thanked me for my patience during what he called a complicated situation. He walked me through the safeguards now in place, showing me screens, checkmarks, notes in the system that all pointed to one thing. I was the only decision maker. "It's your account," he said plainly, "and now it's documented that way." That sentence followed me home like a quiet anthem. I began to notice how differently people treated me when I spoke with certainty. At the pharmacy, when I corrected an insurance detail. At the utility office, when I questioned a late fee that wasn't mine. No apologies, no explanations about my age. Just facts, calmly delivered. One afternoon, my neighbor Ruth stopped me while I was checking the mail. She was a few years younger than me, sharp-eyed, always watching. "I heard your son's been worried about you," she said gently. I smiled, polite and measured. "I'm doing very well," I replied. She studied my face, then nodded. "Good," she said. "You look lighter." That night, I went through old boxes in the spare room. Not documents this time, but memories. Photo albums. Letters Frank had written me when he traveled for work. Birthday cards from Michael. Back when his handwriting leaned left and his words were simple and sincere. I didn't linger in sadness. I let myself feel the whole shape of it, what had been real and what had changed. I realized something important as I sat there on the floor surrounded by paper and time. My son hadn't become cruel overnight. He had grown comfortable assuming, comfortable deciding for me, comfortable believing proximity equaled permission. And I had helped teach him that by never saying no. The realization didn't feel like blame. It felt like responsibility returning to where it belonged. A week later, Claire came to visit. She arrived with a small suitcase and a smile that reached her eyes. She didn't rearrange my cabinets or comment on the state of my house. She asked where I liked to walk, what time I preferred dinner, whether I wanted company or quiet. We spent an afternoon going through my updated documents together, not because she needed to manage them, but because she respected them. "I won't do anything unless you ask me to," she said. "And if you change your mind, that's fine too." The simplicity of it nearly undid me. We cooked together, laughing when the sauce burned slightly. We sat on the porch in the evening, watching the sky turn lavender. For the first time in a long while, I felt accompanied without being handled. Michael didn't reach out. That absence still hurt, but it no longer confused me. I understood now that distance can be information. I began volunteering at the library twice a week, shelving books, helping children find stories they didn't know they were looking for. No one there needed me to be smaller. They just needed me to be present. One afternoon, as I walked home with aching feet and a full heart, I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Gray hair, steady eyes, posture a little straighter than before. I stopped and looked at myself for a moment. I didn't see a woman waiting to be rescued. I saw a woman who had finally stepped back into her own authority, quietly, without spectacle. And I knew then that whatever came next, reconciliation or not, I would meet it standing. The letter from the court arrived on a Tuesday, folded once, official and heavier than it looked. I recognized Michael's handwriting on the forwarding sticker immediately. He hadn't been able to help himself. Even now, he wanted to be part of the delivery. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a notice. Michael and Dana had filed a petition requesting a capacity evaluation, citing concerns about my ability to manage my finances independently. They had attached statements, not medical ones, personal ones, descriptions of my forgetfulness, my withdrawal, my resistance to assistance. I sat very still as I read. The house felt calm, almost protective, like it knew I would need that steadiness. I called Linda. She didn't sound surprised. "This is often the last move," she said. "They're trying to create doubt where evidence hasn't worked." "What happens now?" I asked. "We respond," she said again, "and we show up." The evaluation was scheduled for the following month at a county office I'd driven past 100 times without ever needing to enter. In the weeks leading up to it, I did nothing special. I didn't rehearse speeches or practice being convincing. I lived my life exactly as it was. I paid my bills on time. I attended my volunteer shifts. I kept my medical appointments and asked questions the way I always had. I saved receipts. I wrote in my notebook. Ordinary competence, consistently demonstrated. The day of the evaluation, I wore a simple blue sweater and the pearl earrings Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. Not for luck, for grounding. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Michael and Dana were already there when I arrived. They stood when they saw me, like witnesses rising in court. Dana gave me a tight smile. Michael looked tired. No one spoke. A clerk called my name, and I followed her down a hallway painted a dull, reassuring beige. The evaluator was a woman about my age, maybe younger by a decade, with silver at her temples and kind, observant eyes. She introduced herself and explained the process in clear, respectful language. She didn't talk to me like I was fragile. She asked about my routines, my finances, how I handled unexpected expenses. I told her about my system, my folders, my notes, my bank safeguards. I showed her copies of documents when she asked, not defensively, just thoroughly. She asked about my family. I answered honestly. I didn't accuse. I didn't editorialize. I stated facts the way Linda had taught me. At one point, she asked gently, "Do you feel pressured by anyone in your life right now?" I paused, considering the question carefully. "I did," I said. "But I addressed it." She nodded and made a note. Afterward, there was a brief joint meeting. Michael spoke first, stumbling through his concern, his voice full of practiced worry. Dana added comments about stress and safety and how difficult I had become. When it was my turn, I didn't argue with them. I love my family. I said. But love doesn't cancel consent, and help that isn't asked for can still do harm. The evaluator listened. The clerk listened. The silence in the room felt balanced, not heavy. 2 weeks later, the decision came by mail. No capacity concerns identified. Petition dismissed. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and placed it carefully in my locked cabinet. Michael didn't call after that. Neither did Dana. What surprised me wasn't the relief. It was the calm, the deep, settled calm of knowing that my life now rested on my own name, written clearly, backed by truth. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors that never ask permission to exist. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything quietly, not through force, through assumptions. I took a long breath and felt something like gratitude rise, not toward them, but toward myself. For paying attention in time, for choosing clarity over comfort, for finally understanding that keeping the peace should never cost you your place in your own life. After the petition was dismissed, the world didn't explode back into place. There were no apologies, no dramatic realizations. What returned instead was something quieter and more precious. Normal days that belonged entirely to me. I began noticing how much energy I had been spending for years on bracing myself. Bracing for requests, for expectations, for the next time someone would tell me what was best. Without that weight, even ordinary tasks felt lighter. Folding laundry became a small ritual instead of a chore. Balancing my checkbook felt almost meditative, numbers lining up the way they should. Michael's absence settled into a shape I could live with. I stopped checking my phone for his name. I stopped rewriting conversations in my head, imagining what I should have said differently. Some losses don't need closure to be real. They just need acceptance. Claire called once a week, sometimes more, not to check up on me, but to share her own small frustrations and joys. A difficult meeting at school. A student who surprised her. She asked my opinion and actually waited for the answer. That simple act stitched something back together in me. At the library, a little boy named Ethan began seeking me out during my volunteer shifts. He liked mysteries, but always skipped the last chapter because he said endings made him sad. One afternoon, I told him endings weren't always losses. Sometimes they were proof that something mattered enough to finish. He considered that seriously, then checked out the whole book. I started taking a pottery class at the community center, my hands clumsy but willing. Clay doesn't care about your past mistakes. It responds only to how you touch it now. I ruined 3 bowls before I made one that held water without leaking. I kept it on the windowsill as a reminder. One afternoon, as I was sorting mail, I found a handwritten envelope. The return address was Michael's. I didn't open it right away. I made tea. I sat down. I let myself feel whatever came up before deciding what to do with it. Inside was a short letter. No accusations. No demands. Just a few lines saying he missed me. That things had gone too far, that maybe we could talk someday. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Someday is a gentle word. It leaves space. I wasn't ready to answer it yet, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about that. That evening, I walked through my house as dusk settled in, touching familiar things. The back of the couch, the door frame where we used to mark heights, the smooth edge of the table where so many conversations had taken place. The house no longer felt like something I had to defend. It felt like a companion. I understood now that my revenge, if it could be called that, wasn't in what I had taken away. It was in what I had kept. My name, my choices, my voice. And as the lights came on one by one down the street, I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to give me permission to live the rest of my life exactly as it was meant to be lived, on my own terms and in my own time. The first thing I did that morning was open the window and let the sound of the neighborhood in. A delivery truck idled down the street. Someone laughed 2 houses over. Life, ordinary and imperfect, arrived without asking for proof that I deserved it. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in a long while, my day belonged entirely to me. I made breakfast slowly, the way Frank used to tease me about. Toast just shy of too dark. Coffee poured carefully. No rush. On the table sat my notebook, thick now with dates, names, and truths I had written myself back into. I ran my hand over the cover, feeling a quiet pride I didn't need to explain to anyone. Michael's letter still sat unopened on the sideboard, waiting. I knew it would keep. Words that matter don't spoil overnight. Later that afternoon, I drove to the community center for my pottery class. My bowl, the good one, had finally dried enough to glaze. I chose a soft blue, the color of early morning sky. As I worked, another woman beside me leaned over and said, "It's beautiful. You have a steady hand." I smiled. "I didn't always," I replied. She didn't ask what I meant, and I appreciated that. When I got home, the mail was waiting. Bills I recognized. A note from the library thanking volunteers, and one official envelope, thin and final. Inside was confirmation from the county, my records updated, my directives on file, my wishes clear. No ambiguity left for anyone else to fill in. I sat at the kitchen table and let the weight of it settle. For a long time, I had believed that love meant endurance, that being a good mother meant absorbing discomfort quietly, that gratitude was something you owed when people took over your life for your own good. I know better now. Gratitude is a gift, not a debt. That evening, I finally opened Michael's letter again. I read it slowly this time. I could hear his voice between the lines, confused, wounded, still not entirely seeing me. I didn't hate him for that. I simply accepted it. I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote back. I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped someday we could talk, honestly and respectfully. I told him that any relationship we had going forward would require trust, consent, and space for me to be myself. I didn't threaten. I didn't defend. I didn't explain beyond what was necessary. When I finished, I signed my name clearly at the bottom. Margaret Whitman. Not Mom, not Grandma, just me. I mailed it the next day and felt no rush for a response. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the stars appear one by one. I thought about everything I had almost lost. Not just my house or my money, but my sense of self. How quietly it can happen. How easily a life can be managed away if you're taught to be thankful instead of aware. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? I was lucky. I realized in time. My revenge was never about punishment. It was about refusal. Refusing to disappear. Refusing to be managed into silence. Refusing to accept scraps of respect where dignity was owed. And in giving them nothing, no access, no control, no permission, I gave myself everything back. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know you still owned. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you for listening to an old woman who finally learned how to stand her ground. If this story meant something to you, consider liking it and subscribing so more stories like mine can be told. And tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done?